I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember, bacon makes everything better.
Welcome to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, brought to you by the North Carolina Pork Council. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. I'm Chris Edwards. Great to be back with David for year 2 on the quickly growing North Carolina Sports Network. On our show here in 2024, DG and I are going to mostly look ahead at the upcoming week's college football matchups. We'll also discuss college football's biggest headlines and take a quick glance back with some of DG's expert analysis and the biggest games that are coming up on the schedule and developments from last week's schedule as well. DG now in his 38th year covering college football, both here in North Carolina and around the Atlantic Coast Conference. DG, good to see you again, my friend.
It's great to see you, Chris. I wish we had more positive storylines to cover here in North Carolina college football, but we'll get to the good and the bad and the ugly as we always do.
Well, let's get going here. Segment 1, our 3 to see. We, of course, will get to Wake Forest victory at NC State on Saturday. UNC and their 3-game losing streak after losing at home to Pitt on homecoming this past week. Duke suffering their first loss of the season, just as you said they would. DG at Georgia Tech. And, of course, Charlotte with that 55-24 thrashing of East Carolina. But first, let's look ahead. Here in Week 7, there are a few very important storylines involving some in-state teams. So we'll get to those right away. This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com. All right, DJ, we'll start with game number 1 here. Number 10, Clemson. Tigers 4-1. They are at 2-3, Wake Forest. Noon Saturday, ESPN. Tigers, a 20-point road favorite in Winston-Salem.
Yeah, Chris, with all 3 of these games that we've selected, the state of North Carolina team is at home, and the state of North Carolina team is at least an underdog, and sometimes, as in this case, a significant underdog. So I'm going to be watching all 3 of these through the lens of, can there be an upset by the home in-state team? Now, in this one, the last 25 matchups between Clemson and Wake Forest head-to-head, the Tigers have won 22 times. You're good enough at math to know that that means the Deacs have only 3 wins in the past quarter century. Wake's most recent win over the Tigers came in 2008, although the Demon Deacons did push the game against Clemson to double overtime just 2 years ago right there in Winston-Salem. The dominant theme in this series over the last 2 decades has been that Wake just cannot move the ball consistently or put up a decent number of points against the Tigers' defense, which typically in recent years, of course, has been loaded with NFL caliber talents. In 10 of the last 12 head-to-head matchups against Clemson, the Deacons have failed to surpass even 20 points, although I actually do not think that that will be the case this year. As I mentioned before, the Deacs went to state in Raleigh and beat the Wolfpack. The Deacs actually have a very impressive quarterback in the transfer Hank Bachmeier, who did start games for both Boise State and Louisiana Tech before his arrival in Winston-Salem. They have a great running back in Damon Claiborne, who also was excellent against the Pack. And they have excellent wideouts in Taylor Morin and Donovan Green. The bigger problem for Wake this time is that its defense just has not been very good for Dave Clawson this year. The Demon Deacons are giving up 460 yards per game. That is dead last in the ACC by a significant margin. And they're giving up 31 points per game, which is the second worst number in the league. Clemson's much maligned and much discussed quarterback Cade Klubnik definitely has improved from last season, and he also has one of the league's best rushing attacks, led by the recent David Glenn Show guest Phil Maffa, who is number 3 in the ACC with almost 100 rushing yards per game. That, of course, would help any quarterback at any school in any system. Klubnik also can run the ball just a little bit himself as a dual threat guy. He's built some chemistry with the young wide receivers Antonio Williams and Bryant Wesco Jr., and he's making fewer mental and physical mistakes than he did the last couple years. I still don't think personally that Klubnik is one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC. I wouldn't put him in my top 4, let's say. But this year he is averaging almost 250 passing yards per game, and he's thrown 14 touchdown passes against only 2 interceptions. With that upset theme in mind that I mentioned earlier, if there is a path for Wake in this one, it is creating turnovers on defense and coming up with big plays on offense. That, of course, is much easier said than done against a high-quality Clemson team that once again has its eyes on what would be Coach Dabo Swinney's 8th ACC championship in the last 10 years.
What about game 2 in Chapel Hill this week? 4-2 Georgia Tech at 3-3 North Carolina. We've talked about the Tar Heels on a 3-game losing streak. This is a noon game Saturday on the CW. Jackets a 6-point favorite in Chapel Hill.
Yeah, the starting point for this one to me is not complicated at all. UNC's junior running back, Omarion Hampton, was an All-American last year, and he's actually 5th in the entire nation in rushing this year with 127 yards per game, which is by far the best number in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Georgia Tech, though, has been the number 1 rushing defense in the league so far this season, giving up only 88 yards per game on the ground. Although the Yellow Jackets definitely have not yet faced anyone like Omarion Hampton or any rushing offense for that matter, like the one that the Tar Heels have to offer this year. Expect to see Hampton wearing number 28 going head-to-head with Tech's linebackers Kyle Eford, he wears 44, and Trinellis Tatum wearing number 0 from the linebacker position. I mentioned those numbers because I think we're going to see them collide quite a bit on Saturday afternoon in Chapel Hill. UNC's extremely inexperienced offensive line has improved a bit since the beginning of the season, and that group's just going to have to be at its best this week if the Heels are going to beat the Jackets, both for Hampton in the running game, of course, but also in pass protection where that rebuilt line has not been very good. If the Tech defenders load up against the run, as we'd expect, UNC's quarterback, Jacoby Criswell, the guy who's gone from third stringer to first stringer, is just going to have to make Tech pay for that approach with accurate throws downfield. That's a category where he has been very hit or miss so far this season. Tech's only 2 losses, by the way, came to a Syracuse team that had quarterback Kyle McCord, the Ohio State transfer, throwing the ball all over the place in a way that Carolina has not shown an ability to do this year. The other loss was to a Louisville team that was actually outplayed by Georgia Tech at the line of scrimmage, but the Cardinals just figured out a way to score on both defense and special teams, along with just enough offense against the Jackets. Tech has not been dominant offensively this year, but the Jackets have many of the elements that have driven Carolina's defense crazy this season. They have an experienced dual-threat quarterback in Haynes King, a quality running back in Jamal Haynes, and 2 really speedy, hard-to-cover wide receivers in Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton Jr. Sounds a lot like the Pitt offense that just drove the Heels crazy in Chapel Hill. We'll see if the Jackets do the same. Carolina's defense, which has been missing its best player, the edge rusher Kamen Rucker, for all but a few plays since the team's season opening win at Minnesota, desperately needs more guys to step up as playmakers. Javari Ritzy at tackle has been that guy at times. Amare Campbell at linebacker has been that guy at times. And I believe Elijah Huzzy is one of the best cornerbacks in the entire ACC. But those guys, as the old song goes, need more help from their friends, as shown by the 70-burger that the Heels gave up to James Madison, and even the 34 points and 500-plus yards that they gave up to the Pitt Panthers last week. As with the Clemson-Wake game, bottom line, there is a path to an upset in this one for the Tar Heels. But again, it seems like a very narrow path for the Heels with very little margin for error.
All right, what about game 3? Saturday night in Raleigh, 4-1 Syracuse at 3-3 NC State. 8 o'clock kick, ACC Network, Orange, a 4-point favorite at Carter Finley.
Yeah, the starting point for this one is also simple to me. The Wolfpack's defense, which, remember, did spearhead that recent victory over Northern Illinois, but was not good enough against Wake Forest last week, and, of course, was absolutely devastated by both Tennessee and Clemson earlier this season. That Pack defense must figure out a way to make the Syracuse quarterback I mentioned earlier, Kyle McCord, very uncomfortable, maybe with the help of the fans, at Carter Finley Stadium. That means sacks, obviously, but also batted down passes at the line of scrimmage, quarterback hurries, and all the rest of the chaos factor. An Ohio State transfer who was 12-1 as the Buckeyes starting quarterback. That usually means you're allowed to stay. McCord has been absolutely tearing it up for the Orange. He plays with a lot of swagger and confidence. And right now, he's actually neck and neck with Miami's quarterback, Cam Ward. Yes, the Heisman Trophy candidate, Cam Ward, as the ACC's leading passer. McCord has 17 touchdown passes and 363 passing yards per game. That's right alongside Cam Ward of the Hurricanes. McCord has excellent skill players around him in the tight end, Arondé Gadsden II, and his wide receivers, Trevor Pena and Jackson Meeks. Meeks is actually a Georgia Bulldogs transfer who did not play much for that national championship program over these last 3 seasons, but he's definitely having his coming out party with the Orange in the ACC. Syracuse also has an excellent running back in LaQuint Allen, although he's had only limited stats this year on the ground because Syracuse does not have a great offensive line this year. Again, that means maybe the Wolfpack has something to exploit. Syracuse is not nearly as strong on defense. Now, that means it's up to the true freshman quarterback, C.J. Bailey, to keep the chains moving and keep McCord and that Syracuse offense off the field as much as possible. Everyone has seen by now the scary-looking play from last week where the Wolfpack starter once again, Grayson McCall, his helmet popped off during a collision with 3 Wake Forest tacklers. McCall was temporarily unconscious on the field. It was really scary video. His teammates were waving for the medical staff to come on the field, even as Wake Forest was returning the fumble to the other side of the field. It was a scary scene. McCall had to be taken to the local hospital. The doctors there apparently cleared McCord fairly quickly. But remember, this is the same guy whose season ended prematurely last year at Coastal Carolina because of a concussion, and who missed time with the Wolfpack earlier this season after another head injury. State's offense did make some strides against Wake last week, with Bailey throwing for 272 yards and 2 touchdowns. But the Wolfpack O-line and running game just have not been very good this year, and that needs to change if the Pack is going to knock off Syracuse as a home underdog this week. Again, is it a possible path to an upset? Yes. Would I bet on any of those 3 in-state home underdogs? No.
All right, let's wrap up this segment by you giving us maybe a game involving at least one in-state team that's worth more of a brief mention this week, and why do you think that?
Yeah, well, 5-1 Duke and 3-3 Charlotte and 3-3 ECU are all off this week. We'll actually talk about Pirates head coach Mike Houston a little bit later. So the only answer to this closing question is App State's trip to Louisiana. The Mountaineers are 2-3. All 3 of those losses have been by very wide margins, mainly because their defense just can't get off the field. And now they have to play one of the best teams in the Sun Belt Conference at their place. The Ragin' Cajuns are 4-1. They beat Wake Forest in Winston-Salem earlier this season. Their only loss is to a really impressive Tulane team. So App State is a 10-point underdog in this one. The Mountaineers must look at this as an opportunity to shock the world and get their season back on track. But that definitely will not be easy, even as that is the challenge in front of Coach Sean Clark and his embattled staff right now.
All right, we'll have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, when we come back.
The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Okay, DG, diving right into our ACC and National Week 7 look ahead, brought to you by our good friends at XL Moving and Storage, a family-owned Allied Van Lines partner here in North Carolina with 25 years of award-winning experience that can help you with your move to North Carolina, within North Carolina, or away from North Carolina, even internationally, while also assisting with your storage needs. Learn more at excelms.com. That's XL Moving and Storage. There are 3 DG top 25 versus top 25 matchups on the schedule, the entire national schedule this week. And as we get to this point in the season, that means maybe some repercussions related to the expanded 12-team college football playoff. Now, unfortunately for the ACC, all 3 of the matchups that fit the high-profile description are conference games in either the Big Ten or the Southeastern Conference. So with that thought in mind, we'll start with the newly expanded Big Ten, where one of its longtime members is visiting one of the brand new members of the Big Ten Conference in a game that's got some pretty high stakes. Number 2, Ohio State at number 3, Oregon, 7:30 on Saturday night. NBC Buckeyes, a 4-point favorite on the road.
Yeah, 5-0 against 5-0. Number 2 in the rankings against number 3 in the rankings. National TV, NBC. This one's going to be fun. ESPN's very popular College Game Day show, by the way, is simply moving up the West Coast this week. Reese Davis, Kirk Herbstreit, Nick Saban, and the boys, they were at the thrilling Miami at Cal game last week in Berkeley, and now they'll just head up the coast to the Great Northwest and Eugene, Oregon, to preview this Saturday night matchup between the number 2 Buckeyes and the number 3 Ducks, who are meeting for the first time as Big Ten opponents. These may be the 2 best teams in the recently expanded, now 18-team Big Ten, although 5-0 Penn State looks pretty darn good too. And our old friend, quick shout out to Kurt Signetti, former NC State assistant coach under Chuck Amato, former head coach at Elon University right here in North Carolina, and an extremely successful FCS head coach at James Madison before the Dukes jumped to FBS. He has Indiana off to a 6-0 start. But we'll put that to the side for now. With all due respect to Texas, Oregon, Miami, and anyone else who's high in the national rankings right now, I think Ohio State is the best team in the country. You know, the folks in Columbus did not like arch rival Michigan winning its first national championship since 1997, just last season. And now the Buckeyes, who remember have only 2 national championships since 1970, now they look like they're capable of raising a trophy or 2 of their own this year. OSU is absolutely loaded with NFL caliber talent on both sides of the ball. And remember, during the offseason, the Buckeyes brought in offensive guru Chip Kelly, former NFL head coach, longtime college head coach. He actually left his head coaching job with the UCLA Bruins to take an offensive coordinator position at Ohio State. If that doesn't show your place in the universe or pecking order, I don't know what does. And that was after, remember, the Buckeyes' former offensive coordinator, Bill O'Brien, he didn't leave for just any reason. He got the head coaching job at Boston College here in ACC country. Oregon is very talented too, and the Ducks are at home in this one, as you mentioned. So maybe the sellout crowd can pick them up a bit. But Ohio State is giving up only 202 yards per game and less than 7 points per game so far this season. Both of those numbers, by the way, rank number 1 in the entire FBS ranks. If the Ducks are going to win, they will need a superb performance from the former UCF and former Oklahoma quarterback Dylan Gabriel. He is now a sixth-year senior. He has built some chemistry with the Ducks. He's completing an incredible 78% of his passing attempts so far this season. He is on the NFL's radar as a prospect, but Gabriel's going to need a lot of help if the Ducks are going to beat the Buckeyes.
Well, speaking of Oklahoma, number 18 Oklahoma this week taking on number 1 Texas. Texas 5-0, Oklahoma 4-1. 3:30 game Saturday on ABC in the Red River rivalry. Now a SEC matchup. Boy, I think of Keith Jackson from back in the day here. Longhorns, a 14-point favorite on the road over the Sooners.
You're going to have to give me a Keith Jackson impression.
Nelly.
There we go. Yeah, this on demand. I love it. This Red River Showdown, Chris, is probably what I would put it among the top 5 rivalries in all of college football. We don't have time for that full debate today. Most of us would put Michigan, Ohio State on there. As fellow Americans, we have to have Army, Navy on there somewhere. I'd put Alabama, Georgia on there somewhere, and there are others. But as you said, this is the first time that the Sooners and Longhorns are playing each other as members of the vaunted Southeastern Conference, which has been the best overall on the gridiron for a long time in that sport. And that's after decades together, remember, whether it was the old Big 8 or more recently the Big 12, where the juggernaut programs were usually Texas and Oklahoma. Amazingly, and I think I might have brought this up on our show last year, these two schools have played each other in football since the year 1900. I just never get tired of bringing this up. For perspective, in the year 1900, Oklahoma wasn't a state yet, Chris. That happened in 1907, and the teams were not yet called the Sooners and the Longhorns. Now, since 1932, so almost a century ago, this game has been played at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, which is almost equidistant between the Texas campus and the OU campus. The game is typically played during the Texas State Fair. And this year's matchup between two ranked teams, as usual, is expected to draw yet another crowd of 90,000 plus. Oklahoma actually has had the better of this rivalry lately with 16 victories in the last 24 matchups. And that includes the 34-30 win last season that was revenge for an absolutely dominant 49-0 Texas triumph in 2022. The Sooners' path to victory is more complicated this year than last because they've really struggled offensively against their better opponents so far this season. And right now, the Texas defense is in the top 3 nationally, right up there alongside Ohio State in both yards per game and points per game yielded. The Longhorns' average margin of victory so far this season, or average score, if you will, has been 45-7, and their best win was a 31-12 triumph on the road at number 10 at the time, Michigan. For what it's worth, the lower-ranked team in this Red River rivalry has won 5 of the last 11 regular season matchups in this series. Although Texas in this one is very confident that one or both of its NFL prospects at quarterback, that's Arch Manning, grandson of the famous, uncles are Peyton and Eli, father or grandfather is Archie, easy for me to say. Either Arch Manning, who's started the last couple of games because of an injury to the starter, or the possibly returning this Saturday from injury Quinn Ewers, who some have like 1, 2, or 3 as an NFL prospect among all college QBs right now. The Longhorns really believe that those guys, one or both, can tilt the scales back in the Longhorns' favor this year.
Game 3, number 9, Ole Miss. They're 5-1 for Lane Kiffin. At number 13, LSU. The Tigers 4-1. 7:30 Saturday night, ABC there in Baton Rouge. The Rebels, a 2-point road favorite.
Yeah, I'm not sure either of these teams is good enough to win the Southeastern Conference this year, given the presence of Texas and Georgia and Alabama, et cetera. But in this brand new era of that expanded college football playoff you mentioned a minute ago, Chris, the winner of this game will put itself in great position to chase one of those 7 at-large bids in the current format. Ole Miss is probably the slightly better team right now, if healthy, with its third-year starter and NFL prospect Jackson Dart at quarterback, a guy we highlighted right before he tore up the Wake Forest Demon Deacons in Winston-Salem earlier this year. But the status of the Rebels' top wide receiver, Trey Harris, the guy is leading the nation with almost 150 receiving yards per game. He was knocked out of last week's game with an injury. It's not clear if he's going to play against LSU, although some believe head coach Lane Kiffin is just kind of doing some gamesmanship with his press conference descriptions on that topic. This game also is being played at that other Death Valley, as we call it, which means LSU will be hoping for a loud crowd and an impactful home field advantage. One of the fascinating aspects of this game to me, and I guess this is really off the field, is just wrapping your brain around how the SEC tends to attract elite coaches, but in a wide variety of ways. And most importantly, with a sheer volume that no other league can match. Keep in mind, Ole Miss went in one direction to get Lane Kiffin, and LSU went a different way to get Brian Kelly. Let me explain. Ole Miss hired Lane Kiffin away from Florida Atlantic back in 2020 after Kiffin had really controversial tenures as a much younger head coach in high-profile jobs at both Tennessee and the SEC, and Southern Cal back then was in the Pac-12. That has worked out really well for the Rebels, who have not won an SEC title since 1963, but have averaged almost 10 wins per season and have had 2 finishes in the national top 11 just in these last 3 years under Lane Kiffin. LSU, of course, lured Brian Kelly away from Notre Dame the old-fashioned way after the 2021 season. They backed up the Brinks truck. They had fired, remember, Ed Orgeron, who had led the Tigers 2 years prior to a 15-0 record and the national championship with that Joe Burrow team. That's how it works in the SEC. Win the national title, you might get fired 2 years later. But how did the Tigers do it? By more than tripling Brian Kelly's annual compensation. He was making less than $3 million per year with the Fighting Irish, and they are paying him more than $9 million a year at LSU. That is in the form of a 10-year, $95 million contract with a nice chunk of that guaranteed. There are times that the SEC teams get too much credit. There are times they get too much benefit of the doubt from poll voters. I'm not debating that. But nobody should ever doubt how much they care about football in the Southeastern Conference or how much they are willing to spend on that sport, including during coaching searches in their pursuit of greatness on the gridiron.
We need better agents, DG, is what I think. We'll have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council, when we come back on the North Carolina Sports Network.
King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach is the longest-running restaurant in New Hanover County. That's since 1947, and it recently was renovated to an impeccable degree by our good friends Jimmy Galeese and his amazing wife, Keaton. Their outstanding chefs offer fresh local seafood, salad options, and creative, tasty variations of pork, beef, and poultry dishes. King Neptune has always been a great choice for dinner and or drinks, and now it's open for lunch and brunch too. Check out the lunch, brunch, and dinner menus at neptuneswb.com. That's Neptunes with an S, then WB for Wrightsville Beach. Again, the King Neptune Restaurant website is neptuneswb.com.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. DG, let's dive in to our coaches and quarterbacks segment, brought to you by our good friends at Lawson Insurance, who are about to celebrate their 50th anniversary of helping DG and many other North Carolina citizens and businesses with their personal and commercial insurance needs. You can reach out to the brothers Ken Miller and Michael Lawson. Like us, they're all huge sports fans. Give them a call, 919-846-2090, or search Lawson Insurance online. DG, last week we talked a lot about quarterbacks, and to your credit, the 3 ACC guys you highlighted, Cam Ward of Miami, Kyle McCord of Syracuse, and Eli Holstein of Pitt, all had impressive road victories for their respective clubs, and 2 of those in down-to-the-wire fashion on the road in the ACC. So this week we switched back to the coaches topic because, unfortunately, a lot of very frustrated fan bases right now at the FBS level here in the Old North State. Only first-year Duke head coach Manny Diaz has a winning record at the moment, and several others appear to be in some jeopardy of falling short of the 6 victories that are required to reach a bowl game. UNC's Mac Brown, NC State's Dave Doran, Mike Houston of East Carolina, Biff Poggi of Charlotte, all 3-3 as we reach the halfway point here of 2024. And App State's Sean Clark and Wake Forest's Dave Clawson both have losing records as we record this show. So among those 6 coaches, which of those who are struggling to various degrees, who's the closest to being on the hot seat in your eyes?
Yeah, my short answer is Sean Clark at App State and Mike Houston at ECU. In the bigger picture, while it is true that the conversations surrounding UNC's Mac Brown and NC State's Dave Doran could get very ugly in those schools' fan bases between now and December, remember the conversation around even a 7-5 coach will be a lot different than if either of those guys finish, let's say, 4-8. We're going to revisit their status on future shows. But the clear-cut answer to this question comes down to those 2 guys, Sean Clark and Mike Houston. Unlike Mac Brown, Coach Clark and Coach Houston lead programs at football-first schools where that sport pays the overwhelming majority of the bills and where there's no world-famous, highly profitable men's basketball program contributing to the cause the way, obviously, there is in Chapel Hill. Also, unlike Dave Doran, whose Wolfpack deal goes all the way through 2029 and who has a $15 million buyout right now, there are no contractual terms that would save Coach Clark or Coach Houston if the conversation turns in that direction later this year. The bottom line with Coach Clark at App State is that the bar for the football program there is set in an extremely high place by their current athletic director, Doug Gillen, but also in a more general sense by that school and that administration. The Mountaineers did win 3 FCS national championships less than 20 years ago under their legendary coach, Jerry Moore, and they made a very successful transition to the FBS level under Scott Satterfield, now the head coach at Cincinnati in the Big 12, and for one very successful 12-1 campaign under Eli Drinkowitz, now the head coach at Missouri in the SEC. From 2015 through 2021, with all of those years at the FBS level, and 2 of those years actually under Coach Clark himself, the Mountaineers' average record was roughly 10-3, and they won or shared 4 consecutive Sun Belt championships, 3 under Coach Satterfield, 1 under Drinkowitz. Against that backdrop, Coach Clark went 6-6 in 2022 before bouncing back with a 9-5 record last year. At a school that has had only 2 non-winning seasons in the past 30 years or so, Coach Clark simply cannot have another one this year, especially with all 3 of those losses that have happened this season coming in the blowout type fashion that I mentioned earlier. 66-20 at Clemson, 48-14 at home against South Alabama in a nationally televised Thursday night game on ESPN, and most recently 52-37 at Marshall, with the defense, as we predicted last week, really weighing the Mountaineers down. They're 2-3 as they travel to Louisiana this week as a significant underdog. There is still some time left for them to rally potentially, but a losing record for the season, I think, would be extremely difficult for Coach Clark to overcome in Boone. The bottom line for Coach Houston is that he's coming off a horrendous 2-10 campaign that included, remember, among others, a home loss to the Charlotte 49ers a year ago, a school that jump-started its football program only a decade or so ago. And now Coach Houston's off to a shaky 3-3 start this year, with the most recent game being a truly ugly 55-24 road loss to those same Charlotte 49ers, who, of course, are also a major public university here in North Carolina and now a fellow member of the American Athletic Conference with the Pirates. At a time when the door is wide open for ECU or anyone else to kind of climb the ladder toward the top of the AAC, Now that Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF are members of the Big 12, and SMU is a brand new member of the ACC, those are the 4 schools that had been winning the titles lately. The Pirates appear to be going in the opposite direction and maybe even falling behind in-state rival Charlotte, which has much less of a gridiron history, much less fan support, much less media attention, and a variety of other disadvantages compared to what ECU has in Greenville. ECU will be a major underdog for its road trips to Army and North Texas, and the Pirates will be an underdog again when they host Navy in their regular season finale. That essentially leaves zero margin for error if the team is going to make a bowl game with 6 or more victories, and that might be the threshold required for Mike Houston to keep his job in Greenville.
On the flip side now, which of our 7 in-state FBS coaches, in your mind, DG, still has a chance to say, let's win 9 games this season?
Yeah, my honest answer is that no FBS team in our state is going to win 9 games this season. I mean, you need to be a well-rounded football team to win 9 games or more. Right now, record-wise, 5-1 Duke has the best chance of pulling this off. But the Blue Devils offense, as we warned everyone 1 week ago before their trip to Georgia Tech, just is not consistently productive enough to win most big games against quality opponents. Duke's remaining schedule, by the way, resumes next week with home games against Florida State and SMU, then road trips to Miami and NC State. And then the Devils finish the regular season by hosting Virginia Tech and visiting Wake Forest. There's not a guaranteed win anywhere in that group, although, of course, I don't think Duke would go winless in that stretch. You could say that 8-4 is a possibility for Duke, and technically, of course, if you can win your bowl game to supplement those 8 regular season wins, then you're at the 9-win mark, and you're the correct answer to Chris Edwards' question. But that will be, I think, a challenge for the Blue Devils, to say the least. And none of the other 6 FBS teams in our state has any chance at 9 or more victories. I know they might mathematically, but it ain't going to happen. Charlotte, ECU, and NC State have way too many problems on offense. App State, UNC, and Wake Forest have way too many problems on defense. Unfortunately, the revised version of your question a month from now might be, DG, how many of our in-state teams can make a bowl game? And I'm not sure that number is going to be very pretty either, unfortunately.
We'll take one more time out. We'll come back and have more of This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council on the North Carolina Sports Network.
Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas & Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, presented by the North Carolina Port Council. Now, the focus of our show is going to mostly be forward-looking as often as possible. We are going to take a quick glance back at the previous weekend in college football, in part because DG always seems to find that intriguing angle or offers a unique observation or historical perspective that we can't find anywhere else. So with that thought in mind, we bring you our quick glance back to Week 6, brought to you by our good friends at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. Jimmy's has a full bar, nightly drink specials, and live music 365 days a year. And right next door, you'll find King Neptune. That's become one of the best restaurants in the entire greater Wilmington area. Keep up with Jimmy's on Facebook and learn more about King Neptune Restaurant at neptuneswb.com. Now, Week 6 offered some intriguing developments beyond those we've already discussed, DG, including a couple of games we previewed on our show last week. 8th-ranked Miami came back from 25 points down late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and posted a 39-38 win at Cal with ESPN's College Game Day on hand there in Berkeley. Clemson went to Tallahassee and, as we expected, beat Florida State 29-13. Tigers now 4-1, up to number 10 in the national rankings, while the Seminoles, the preseason favorite to win the ACC, let's remember, they're now 1-5 on the season for Mike Norvell. And finally, SMU went to Louisville, beat the number 22 Cardinals 34-27. SMU quietly 5-1. They're now in the national rankings at number 25. So while we're mostly stuck measuring our mediocrity here in North Carolina, DG, which ACC teams and maybe how many ACC teams do you see as legitimate contenders for that expanded 12-team college football playoff?
Yeah, for now, Chris, the answer to your question is the 4 ACC teams currently ranked in the national top 25. Miami is 6-0 and up to number 6 in the AP poll. Clemson is 4-1 and up to number 10. Pitt is 5-0 and just entered the poll at 22. And as you said, SMU is 5-1 and now at number 25. But I really think the two teams that are in the driver's seat to play each other in the ACC title game, based both on how they're playing and their remaining schedules, are Miami and Clemson, and maybe not even in that order. The biggest concerns with the Hurricanes are, number one, that they haven't been playing dominant defense, and number two, they still have road games against 3 pretty solid teams that are very capable of an upset: Louisville, Georgia Tech, and Syracuse. Clemson's toughest remaining games in the regular season appear to be a home contest against Louisville and a road trip to Pitt. I actually like the Tigers' ability to manage that schedule and course better than I like, say, the Hurricanes' chance of remaining undefeated. The dream scenario for the ACC, obviously, is for the two teams that make it to Charlotte for the ACC title game has such pretty records at the time that both the winner and the loser of that game will make the college football playoff. And that could happen with Miami and Clemson, but obviously there's a long way to go. If either Miami or Clemson does falter down the stretch, and nobody is indestructible, I can promise you that, SMU will have a chance to get into this mix. Remember, they won the American Athletic Conference a year ago, and we promised you they would be the best of the newcomers to the ACC this year. They indeed are that. The Mustangs are 5-1. Their toughest remaining games against Pitt, BC, and Cal are all at home right there in Dallas. Pitt does have to be mentioned too because the Panthers have a 5-0 record, but they still have road games ahead against SMU, Louisville, Boston College, plus home games against Cal, Syracuse, and Clemson. So the answer clearly starts with the Clemson Tigers and the Miami Hurricanes, but there are at least a couple others where their fan bases should not give up hope yet.
All right, we celebrate all levels of football here on This Week in College Football with David Glenn. Hopefully you know that by now. So, DG, among our in-state teams and players at all of those levels of football that we play, who do you see as deserving of a shout-out for either where they stand or where they're headed into Week 7, or even a performance in particular from last week?
Yeah, shout out to the best college football story in the state of North Carolina right now. Head coach Maurice Flowers. This has become almost a weekly tradition here on our program, but Coach Flowers has Johnson C. Smith University, a Charlotte-based school with very, very, very little football history, and where Coach Flowers himself was once an all-conference quarterback wearing that uniform. He has his team off to its first 6-0 start since 1969, when Chris Edwards was not alive and even I was barely alive. That is also the only time the program has won the conference championship in what's called the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, better known as the CIAA, the league that JCSU has been a member of for almost 100 years now. One conference championship in almost 100 years, and maybe Maurice Flowers has them knocking on the door again. This year's Golden Bulls have been ranked in the Division II Coaches Top 25 for the first time in program history, debuting at number 24 last week, moving up to number 22 this week. The Bulls edged Virginia State 21-17 last Saturday, improving to 3-0 in CIAA play and becoming the only HBCU program in the entire country that is still undefeated on the 2024 season. Coach Flowers was a star quarterback way back in the day at East Mecklenburg High School right there in Charlotte back in the mid-1980s. And since his time as JCSU's star quarterback, He's worked his way up the high school and college coaching ranks over these last 3 decades. In 2022, he took over a Johnson C. Smith football program that had gone 16-43 over the previous 6 seasons combined. But under Coach Flowers, the Golden Bulls went 2-7 in year 1, transition. They jumped all the way to 7-4 and a trip to the Florida Beach Bowl in year 2 last season. And now year 3 under Coach Flowers has at least a chance to be, no exaggeration, a chance to be the best season in the history of the program, a program whose first game was played all the way back in 1892. The Golden Bulls have an open week this week. Then they host Shaw University at the on-campus Irwin Belk Complex on October 19th. If you have never been there, the Irwin Belk Complex is a multi-purpose facility that opened more than 20 years ago, where you can actually see the facility from the highway if you're driving there in Charlotte on Interstate 77. It has hosted the NCAA's Division II Outdoor Track and Field Championships. It has hosted a bunch of CIAA events many times over these 20-plus years. And it offers actually, when you're sitting in the stands, you have a beautiful view of the Charlotte skyline from inside the stadium. So good luck to Coach Flowers and the Bulls as they face the Shaw Bears, not this Saturday, but the following Saturday in a CIAA matchup, and as they continue their attempt to make history right there in the Queen City.
We love ending it on a positive note.
Amen.
We hope to have more positive notes in the weeks to come. Big thanks to the North Carolina Port Council for being the founding partner of the North Carolina Sports Network, and we welcome Atlantic Tire and Service, now with 6 locations in the Triangle, as our newest sponsor. A quick reminder, DG and his staff posting daily articles at our fast-growing website, ncsportsnetwork.com, which also has direct links on its homepage to this YouTube channel, a wide variety of places you can get on-demand audio and podcast of our show, The David Glenn Show, and all of our other offerings, and updates on year 2 of our Old North State Tailgate and Traveling Sports Circus, which will be in Wilmington this week, this Saturday and Sunday, for our North Carolina Port Council football weekend at the beach. That 2-day tailgate tour stop, including visits with our good friend Bob Hubbard at the original Salt Works on Oleander Drive in Wilmington, plus Jimmy and Keaton Galeese at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. You can find the full schedule for our football weekend at the beach at our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. So for David Glenn, I'm Chris Edwards. Thanks for joining us this week for This Week in College Football with David Glenn, right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.